Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And peace. Welcome to the 2008 Don Yoder lecture. As Don always reminds me, it's not the Don Yoder Memorial Lecture. He would really be angry if he knew I was telling you that at age 87 years old, Don Yoder is preparing a new edition of his book on folklore, Christmas folklore, in which he tells me now is going to have all color photographs in it. Ever the merchandiser, Don knows what he's doing. And he also said to me that he's decided this month to revisit Thoreau and Emerson and sit and read that and enjoy that. Only Don Yoder at 87 would be revisiting Emerson and Thoreau. So he's doing beautifully. As I'd like to say, he's doing better than I am as far as that's concerned. So God love him. And he's also giving me all of his books that he doesn't want from his old office. So now I'm on box number 12. You can imagine what fun that is. I want to introduce our Don Yoder lecturer for this evening, who is someone who in a way doesn't need any introduction, Dr. Diane Goldstein. Diane is professor of folklore at Memorial University of Newfoundland, where she has a cross appointment between the folklore department and the medicine division of community health and humanities. At Memorial, she's a winner of the President's Award for Outstanding Research, and among her many obligations are 2 books. She's the co-author of a recent book called Haunting Experiences, Ghosts in Contemporary Folklore, and that's with Sylvia Grider, yes, and G. Thomas. And that is an award winner. It has recently won the Brian McConnell Book Award for the best book in legend studies for 2008. And Diane is also the author of Once Upon a Virus, AIDS Legends, and Vernacular Risk Perception. And both of these books are from Utah State University Press. Diane is also a member of the board of the American Folklore Society, as well as a fellow of the American Folklore Society. We're really, Maggie, Kruesi, and I are quite thrilled to have her as the Don Yoder lecturer, and we welcome her. Diane.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I promised that I would not say anything either interesting or important tonight so that all the people who are with Stetson Kennedy can be happy, and so it's out of respect for Stetson Kennedy. It is indeed an honor to be asked to deliver this year's Don Yoder lecture. Don was my teacher and my mentor, as he was for so many of us here. And I hope you will forgive me for being over dramatic. I'm known for that. Don was also my salvation, saving me from what I'm sure would have been certain deaths by textual exegesis. In 1979, having graduated with a BA in Religious Studies from Memorial University, I began my MA initially in the Religious Thought Department at the University of Pennsylvania. Although I loved every minute of my Memorial University experience with religious studies, I was a real fish out of water at Penn. In those days, the Religious Thought Department at Penn was very textually oriented, obsessed with their new computers that spoke Greek and Hebrew. I kept babbling on about belief and believers, about faith and practice, and as my instructors continually looked at me like I had 16 heads, it wasn't long before I realized how very lucky I had been at Memorial to be in a conventional religious studies department that still recognized that religion had something to do with people, and how very problematic my new situation was going to be. In those days, Don Yoder was cross-appointed between religious thought and folklore. I did Don's course in folk religion, then sex and cults, SECTS, then FOLKLIFE, and ultimately, I did every course Don offered. Eventually, Don suggested I move over to the folklore department. I'm guessing now that the head of religious studies put him up for that. I responded that I couldn't do that. I had certain family issues, which did not involve explaining to my parents what folklore was. And in what I now understand as Don being his most assertive, he replied gently, not only that I could, but that I should. He was right. Thanks to Don, I moved over to folklore, a move that I have never even for 1 second regretted. So Don plucked me out of the depths of textual despair in religious studies and gently nudged me into the highly peopled discipline of folklore, a gesture for which I will be forever eternally grateful. Even though I witnessed the stark contrast Don provided to his colleagues in religious thought, it took me many years before I came to understand the political and more than slightly subversive nature of Don's courses and research in the face of conservative religious studies. Back in the folklore department, surrounded by leftist scholars whose interests in folklore came out of their involvement in the 1950s labor and civil rights movements, bow-tied, mild-mannered, and modest Don Yoder certainly didn't seem to stand out as a rabble-rouser. But Don continually stood up as a champion of vernacular religions, medical and artistic voices, beliefs and practices, and in his own way continually confronted and challenged the elitism which denied or subordinated those voices. In 1974, he wrote, "The teaching of religious studies in the United States has concentrated largely on the theological and institutional level, which either neglects folk practices and folk interpretations of religion as unimportant, or it neglects them because the discipline has too rigid a framework to include such phenomena." Yoder also criticized the refusal of American folkloristics to include religious folk life, noting that folklore provides no categories in which to include religious phenomena unless it includes them under that impossible survival from the Enlightenment, that word superstition, which blocks any sympathetic understanding of the belief elements in folk religion. Don was keenly aware of the cultural politics that lay beneath the rhetoric of the disciplines, creating dismissal of both the folk and their belief. But even as Don was defending us from the evils of academic and cultural elitism, promoting democratic discourse as inseparable from what we do, and advocating in his classes and in his writings for attention to subordinated voices and communities, I couldn't see the politics implicit in his actions or his scholarship, and Don never completely came clean. Don, of course, wasn't alone in not being explicit about the politics of his scholarship. Such were the pre-reflexive, pre-cultural studies times. But even today, belief scholars, while certainly engaged in reflexive thought and scholarship, are often silent about the political agendas that underlie our theoretical and methodological choices. So my paper today is about coming clean. As belief scholars and folklorists in general, we typically take the politics of our work to be natural, neutral, and self-evident, treating our scholarly perspectives as givens rather than as purposeful constructions. While we betray a lack of engagement with the political nature of our work and of our methodologies, our work selectively produces and legitimates particular forms of knowledge and authority which support, challenge, or subvert particular relations of power. Not acknowledging the inherent politics of our work wrongly suggests that we are chroniclers of culture and not active participants in its construction. Of course, our discipline as a whole has always been reluctant to own up to our politics. and open recognition of a political basis for our work has not been without its critics. Over the years, debates have continually raged about, on the one hand, our disciplinary responsibility to advocate for those we study, and on the other hand, concerns about making folklore studies the site of political critique and intervention. Just a sampling of quotes reminds us of the passion involved in those debates, both in the past and to this very day. Ben Botkin. I always tell my students when I do this with them, you get to figure out who the good guys and the bad guys are. Ben Botkin. Upon us, he said, I'll get it together here in a minute. Upon us devolves the tremendous responsibility of studying folklore as a living culture and of understanding its meaning and function, not only in its immediate setting, but in progressive and democratic society as a whole. That was 1939. Folk song revivalists, this is also Ben Botkin. Folk song revivalists must ally themselves with the dynamic creative forces of cultural pluralism and equality against the forces of conformity and reaction. That was 1959. Richard Dorson. I contend that it is no business of the folklorist to engage in social reform, that he is unequipped to reshape institutions, and that he will become the poorer scholar and folklorist if he turns activist. Also Richard Dorson. We cannot afford much diversion from our primary responsibilities as scholars to seek and record the truth about man and his ways. I hesitate to give advice on how to make the world better or happier or freer through folklore. Also Richard Dorson. Once we cease to be cool, calm, detached, imperturbable scholars and get carried away, we may get in trouble. And that's from the Point Park Conference on Applied Folklore. David Schuldener. All folklorists have a stake in the promotion of democratic discourse, inseparable from, and in fact, the driving force behind much of the work that they do. 1998. David Wisnett, my favorite quote on earth. To engage with I'm editorializing, I'm not supposed to do that. To engage with public issues and act in a public arena is to intervene inescapably in the lives of individuals and in the institutions that embody their collective will and vision. The question is not whether we shall intervene, but how and with what effects, amid what particular set of historical, cultural, and political circumstances, and in the service of what values and social vision. 1988. Elliot Oren, channeling Richard Dorson. One may use a hammer and a saw to help a person repair his roof, but that does not characterize carpentry as a charitable enterprise rooted in a commitment to social justice. The same might be said for folklore. Folklore is not one of the helping professions. I do not understand why those who seek to respond to inequality, promote democratic values, and make the world more just and humane would make folklore as their profession of choice. I have to take that off of there. Okay. Like Botkin, Schuldener, and Wisnett, I believe that folklore is inherently political. By virtue of our traditional disciplinary resistance to cultures of exclusion, which ignore the multiple narratives, histories, and voices of culturally and politically subordinated groups. How could we not understand our focus on non-elite history, our understanding of the import of the oral, not just the literate, the unofficial, not just the institutionalized, diversity, not just the mainstream? How could we not understand what we do, the skills that we have, our discipline as inherently political? So what I intend to do today is to explore the intrinsic politics that shape post-contextualist belief studies. This paper will explore our engagement with subaltern voices, subordinated knowledges, and vernacular culture, suggesting that what marks the belief scholar's particular brand of politics is a type of methodological play that challenges and subverts cultural symmetries and asymmetries. Before I begin, 3 caveats bear mentioning. First, the scope of my talk allows discussion of only a smattering of the scholarship that engages in the methodological strategies that I am suggesting. I cannot discuss all, nor am I suggesting that any unmentioned work does not find equally or perhaps even more interesting ways of participating in subverting belief asymmetries. Secondly, not all belief studies are inherently political, and not all use the methodologies I discuss here. But in post-contextualist belief scholarship, I would argue that it is the norm. And third, numerous scholars outside of belief studies engage in these same political strategies, but the residue of post-Enlightenment scientific rationalism has deeply polarized belief in ways that make it a site of continual contestation between those who claim the rational and those who are assigned the irrational, between vernacular and hegemonic, and between the local and the larger than local. Since we've been discussing Don Yoder, and since we are here to honor him, I would like to begin there. But Don also makes sense intellectually as a starting place. As we all know, Don Yoder was the source of many definitional articles on folklife in the early 1960s and 1970s, as part of his attempt to translate concepts from European regional ethnology into American folkloristics, and to solidify an interest in folklife as a part of American scholarship. Don wrote several definitional articles on folklife, including folk cookery, folk costume, folk medicine, and folk religion. When using the medicine and religion articles in class, I often refer to them as the apart from but alongside articles. Here is what I mean. Folk religion, Yoder wrote, is the totality of all those views and practices of religion that exist among the people apart from and alongside the strictly theological and liturgical forms of official religion. Folk medicine was similarly defined. But Yoder was gently criticized by Pat Mullen and by his friend and protege, Leonard Primiano. You're going to have to give back all those books, Leonard. For his two-tiered model in the apart from and alongside definitions, which they felt dichotomized official and unofficial religiosity. According to Primiano, distinct categories separating the folk or popular religion of the faithful from official or institutional religion administered by hierarchical elites residualizes the religious lives of believers and at the same time reifies the authenticity of religious institutions as the exemplar of human religiosity. Pat Mullen's critique was similar, criticizing the continued contemporary reliance on definitions of folk belief, which contrast unofficial and official belief traditions, and which therefore continue to emphasize older dichotomies and hierarchies of belief. Mullen's main concern was with romanticism in the construction of the folk, and how these older dichotomies of folk versus official so often depict folk belief as inferior, primitive, and irrational. But while both Primiano and Mullen criticized Yoder's use of the official-unofficial dichotomy, they also both recognize that nowhere does Yoder suggest inferiority. In fact, Yoder continually recognizes the interdependence of official and unofficial, and in the case of folk medicine, asserts the frequent superiority of unofficial belief. I have always read Yoder's apart from but alongside definitions as comments on religious politics and medical politics, not on the shape, content, or quality of the tradition. Yoder notes in my own conceptualization, folk religion exists in a complex society in relation to and in tension with the organized religions of that society. Mullen and Primiano argue that organized and unorganized are semantic equivalents of official and unofficial, as demarcations of folk religion, and that the distinction is based on the hierarchical dichotomy that privileges official religion over unofficial or folk religion. To my mind, that was exactly the point. Yoder's use of the official, unofficial, or organized versus unorganized dichotomy was, I believe, primarily pointed at highlighting the societal hegemonic privileging of official religion over folk religion, at least in the West. Yoder was not condoning the power differential, but rather acknowledging and highlighting it. Mullen himself writes about the dichotomous definition of folk belief as unofficial in opposition to official belief. This is obviously a very useful definition for investigating the cultural politics of belief. Mullen also recognizes, however briefly, the import of the cultural politics inherent in belief scholarships focus on dichotomies: official, unofficial, institutional, vernacular, organized, unorganized, and he quotes with agreement Hufford's statement, folk beliefs, unofficial beliefs, are those that develop and operate outside of powerful social structures. But exploration of the inherent political nature of these dichotomies falls understandably outside of Mullen's primary concern with romanticism in the construction of the folk and folk belief, and little more is said in relation to the political nature of the dichotomy. Yoder's dichotomization and hierarchization of belief reflected, I believe, a keen awareness of a very real political situation in which institutional, official, mainstream religion is immediately understood as fundamentally more powerful than folk or unofficial religion. This is particularly the case in Roman Catholic and other traditions, in which the Church itself clearly defines and dictates the appropriate beliefs and actions of the laity. Reflecting that viewpoint, a few years ago, I taught an elderly Roman Catholic priest in my folk religion course. Faced with the question on the midterm, what is folk religion? I know it's not a very creative question. He responded, folk religion is the work of the devil. He meant it. Folk religion for him was all of the things that people believe that they aren't supposed to, the beliefs that are understood as unchurchly. Similarly, in religious orthodoxy and popular faith in European society, Stanley Brandeis stressed religious control as at the political center of the distinction between institutional and folk religion. He argued to speak of religious orthodoxy and popular faith is automatically to invoke the image of a multi-layered religious hierarchy and cultural tradition. Not only are the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches themselves highly stratified, but at least until recently, they have fostered the differentiation through custom, and canon law of clergy from laity. In addition, Catholic and Orthodox clergy have for centuries debated questions of religious orthodoxy and defined that orthodoxy for all lay adherents of religion. The imbalance in power differentials is even more clearly displayed when one thinks about institutional versus lay medicine, where asymmetrical power relationships determine diagnosis, cause, cure, and ultimately who gets to live or die. Lay practitioners are not institutionally recognized. Generally, they do not receive third-party payment and often cannot work legally. And while 79 to 90% of all health care is taken care of in the home, lay health practice is taken to be minority, unofficial, and certainly inferior medicine. Yoder's apart from, but alongside definitions, emphasize the political power differential, but also raise the unofficial to alongside. In other words, to equal elevation. In a kind of subversive methodological play that takes asymmetry and makes it appear symmetrical, Yoder marks the political difference, but simultaneously disallows it. Apart from, but alongside, opens up the possibility for questioning how power operates in the construction of belief, while simultaneously redefining the oppressive parameters of belief institutions. Primiano, while attempting to avoid the dichotomizing and residualizing suggestion of folk religion, introduced the more nuanced notion of vernacular religion. Vernacular religion, as Primiano defines it, is by definition religion as it is lived, as human beings encounter, understand, interpret, and practice it. He argues since religion inherently involves interpretation, it is impossible for the religion of an individual not to be vernacular. It is relatively easy for the folklorists to understand the vernacular nature of the religion of the common people. It is less easy for folklorists, as well as other scholars of religion, to grasp the vernacular nature of the institutionalized elements of religion, its clerical functionaries, its oral and written statements, and its ritualized or sacramental occasions and observances. Primiano continues, a vernacular religious viewpoint shows that designations of institutionalized religion as official are inaccurate. What scholars refer to as official religion does not in fact exist. There are bodies and agencies of normative prescriptive religion, but there is no objective existence of practice which expresses official religion. No one, no special religious elite or member of an institutional hierarchy, neither the Pope in Rome, nor the Dalai Lama of Tibet, nor the Patriarch of Istanbul, nor the Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem, lives an officially religious life in a pure, unadulterated form. The members of such a hierarchy, this is Primiano, the members of such a hierarchy themselves are believing and practicing vernacularly, even while representing the most institutionally normative aspects of their religious tradition. I always suspected that from an emic Catholic perspective, Primiano's assertion that the Pope had vernacular religion would be considered at least slightly blasphemous, a concern that was confirmed recently when one of my Italian Catholic grad students noted that poor Leonard would be going to hell at least a little bit for his article. And not just for saying that the Pope had vernacular religion, but also for comparing his spirituality to the Dalai Lama. Oh well, Leonard, there's always confession. I hope you guys get the irony of this bad Jewish girl telling this good Catholic boy how to be Catholic, but anyway. I have a different concern at the moment. Primiano argues what scholars refer to as official religion does not in fact exist. There are bodies and agencies of normative prescriptive religion, but there is no objective existence of practice which expresses official religion. What he is getting at is that no one completely replicates an ideal tradition, and I agree with that. While official religion may not exist manifest in a single believer, certainly its officialness exists, creating and maintaining political asymmetries in who gets to say what one gets to believe and how one can practice those beliefs. In other words, clearly, not all vernaculars get to be equal. But like Yoder's apart from and alongside, Primiano's gift of vernacular religion to the Pope uses the same kind of subversive methodological play that Yoder did, taking political asymmetry and making it appear symmetrical. Like Yoder, Primiano disallows the political difference in a way that resembles the popular lyric, "What if God was one of us, just a Slav like one of us?" While Yoder promotes folk religion to sit politically alongside official religion, Primiano reverses the tactic and demotes, or I wanted to say deflates, the Pope. Yoder's and Primiano's methods, like mine and most likely like yours, are kaleidoscopic, which is why we have this picture. They use a type of methodological play that I believe most scholars knowingly or unknowingly engage in, which takes asymmetrical power relationships, such as lay people and doctors, laity and religious institutions, and reverse asymmetries, creating reversible worlds. It is ultimately this methodological play, I believe, that characterizes belief politics in folklore. I am using kaleidoscopes as a metaphor partly because I like them, partly because it provides images for a talk that doesn't lend itself to pictures, but mostly because symmetries and asymmetries make me think of kaleidoscopes. And as Irving Goffman and others have taught us, metaphors like stages and frames and asylums don't just illustrate straight, they help us think. I can use all the help I can get. So, broken bits of shiny colored glass inside a tube. Looking in one end while the other is pointed toward the light somehow creates an amazing, incredibly symmetrical, and unusually beautiful picture. And as the tube is rotated, the tumbling of the colored objects changes the colors and patterns. But to the children that are so attracted to them, the truly astonishing thing is that any arbitrary pattern of objects shows up as a new, beautiful, symmetrical pattern. When I was a kid, I loved kaleidoscopes. Born into the cultural aesthetic of bilateral tripartite symmetry, I learned that from Henry Blassie, and I love to say it whenever I can. The randomness that became so ordered was magical to me. I could see the glass moving, and then presto, there was symmetry. I wanted to know how that could happen. And in the absence of Google in those days, that meant getting those patterns out of the tube, out into the open air where I could see them. I broke open my kaleidoscope, and then I waited for the symmetrical patterns to come out, but they didn't. Out came the broken bits of shiny colored glass in a shiny but kind of messy pile. No symmetry. That wasn't good. So I broke open my sister's kaleidoscope. Same thing. Glass, no pattern. It had to be something about that tube. Looking inside, I found the culprit, mirrors. Typically, there are two rectangle lengthwise mirrors in kaleidoscopes. Setting of the mirrors at 45 degrees creates 8 duplicate images of the objects, 6 at 60 and 40 at 90, and 4 at 90. As Enrique Meyer notes, the kaleidoscope is uniquely inept as a metaphor for conveying the notion that one wants to view things with clarity. It obfuscates rather than clarifying. It contains all this stuff, glass and stones or buttons, that undergo multiple reflections through intersecting mirrors, producing endlessly transforming symmetrical patterns. But obfuscating power differentials is exactly what we want. The kaleidoscope messes with asymmetry. And that is a good thing in terms of seeing, understanding, and challenging power differentials. Domination is both dependent on power asymmetry and has asymmetry as its goal. So obfuscation of that asymmetry has a function. It changes things up, reveals new and different perspectives. That is a good thing, as long as we remember that the newfound symmetry is a result of mirrors. Of course, one might and should argue that so is the old asymmetry. To be useful as a metaphor, notes Mayer, one has to pay more attention to the position of the mirrors than to the illusory pattern it creates. In other words, it's not just the new shapes our methodological play allows us to see. It is also being conscious of the mirrors that got us there. The issue of symmetry, asymmetry, and symmetrical play, as tied to the work of a folklorist, has not been ignored. Amy Schumann has discussed it in a number of her writings on narrative entitlement in the local, and David Hufford uses what he calls methodological symmetry as the second of two principles he thinks are important for belief studies. Hufford defines methodological symmetry as a requirement that in any comparison of traditions, including those of physicians to those of patients, we ask the same questions of each. Hufford says, we won't take the patient's account at face value, but neither will we imagine that the medical statements are true, because the doctor said so. This guarantees that in a medical setting, we will stay close to our proper role, that of subversives. Hufford's methodological symmetry asks the same questions of each as though each would have something to say, as though each had equal import, and as though each had equal power. Not a stretch for a folklorist, perhaps, but it does require recognition that patient truth claims be treated with the same respect as physician truth claims. To underline and reinforce this symmetrical play, Hufford introduces another principle, which he calls methodological populism. Methodological populism, according to Hufford, requires that when comparing official and unofficial views, we always begin with a serious consideration that the unofficial position may be correct. While Yoder elevates folk religion and Primiano reduces the asymmetrical power of the Pope, Hufford changes everyone's position by using one set of questions not tailored on the basis of existing power asymmetries. Not assuming that medical statements are true and vernacular statements are less true because of the power position of the physician in a medical context is, as Hufford notes, subversive, like Yoder's treatment of folk religion as alongside in the context of religious studies. Like Hufford, ELAINE LAWLESS redresses power imbalances through symmetrical play, which asks the same questions of all parties. But in Lawless's case, the effort is dedicated to trying to relieve the asymmetry of the ethnographic encounter. Her attempt to take reflexive ethnography a step further by introducing reciprocal ethnography helps to redress a different kind of power imbalance, the ones found within the academic encounter. Alertly conscious of the cultural authority of the investigator and cautious of Susan Ritchie's folklorist as ventriloquist syndrome, Lawless invites her informants to challenge her work, and while still controlling the ultimate textual product, displays a dialogue of interpretation. In her book, Holy Women, Sharing Ministries of Wholeness Through Life Story and Reciprocal Ethnography, Lawless plays with the political asymmetry normally present in those encounters, sometimes foregrounding their interpretation, sometimes her own, and bravely giving up not all, but a great deal of the author's interpretive control. Lawless's reciprocal ethnography responds to yet another symmetrical principle from David Hufford, that the belief system of scholars be answerable to the same questions as those applied to the belief systems they study. Thinking about my own work is somewhat more difficult, and at this point in the paper I was really hoping I hadn't chosen this topic. I know that I see my work as politically kaleidoscopic, mostly through symmetrical play that foregrounds what is normally backgrounded, and perhaps even more importantly, backgrounds that which is normally foregrounded. But further, I have often chosen topics only partially consciously that are constituted by the loudest of dominant discourses, thereby allowing me to reverse or play with, at least temporarily, the very deepest of asymmetries. These are the topics that are so strongly contested that they appear uncontested, self-evident, and neutral. In Amy Schumann's words, they are constructions that hide their constructedness. 3 examples, arranged from perhaps the least contentious to the most contentious, will suffice. First, a group of women who considered themselves to be extreme sufferers of menopause, and who, in the face of massive evidence about the dangers of hormone replacement therapy, not only continued to take hormone replacement, but signed up with multiple doctors so they could stockpile prescriptions and self-prescribe large quantities on the basis of perceived fluctuations in hormone levels. Secondly, I worked on a variety of cases of non-disclosure of HIV, highlighting cultural reasons for non-disclosure, including undisclosed blood bank donation to rid one's body of bad blood in hopes of non-infected cell replacement, misunderstandings of asymptomatic seropositivity, in other words, what it is to be a healthy carrier, and concern for one's own safety or the safety of an unborn child in the face of fears of domestic abuse following disclosure. And third, my current passion, women who kill their children. As one of my students commented about my topic choices, I just can't resist the dark side. But the dark side is where the dominant discourses are so deep that even those who are involved in the issues can't be heard behind the cultural construction. By reversing asymmetries and foregrounding those lost voices, we can see new dimensions of problems and issues. To demonstrate what I mean, I will take a few minutes to talk about women who kill their children. My project on maternal infanticide, and this is just in its infancy, and I hate to use that pun, explores the narrative construction of maternal infanticide and filicide in contemporary North American vernacular discourse, media, and legal proceedings. For close analysis of maternal infanticide narratives and their use in community, media, and legal contexts, my project is intended to demonstrate the relationship between narrative formation and maintenance and the social construction and contestation of infanticide both as a crime and in contemporary legal process in North America. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 2007, more than 18,700 children were murdered in the U.S. between 1976 and 2005, with 31% of those children murdered by their fathers and 29% murdered by their mothers. While parental murders occur in the U.S. at a rate of nearly one child per day, and in Canada at a rate of one child every other week, and the perpetrators of infanticide in both countries are as likely to be fathers as they are mothers, the news media treats these events as rare and sensational, particularly when they involve the mother. Infanticide has historically been defined by narrative imagery, with infanticidal mothers compared in 18th and 19th century popular literature to monsters, giants, and two-headed women on display at fairground sideshows. Today in the criminal trials, the media and the courts continue to present infanticide as perhaps the most horrendous, incomprehensible crime, and infanticidal mothers, especially those of color or economic disadvantage, as beyond evil. The murdering mother is seen as an abomination of nature. It is an unthinkable, unfathomable crime. Interestingly, vernacular narrative tradition has a very different take on maternal infanticide. Let me illustrate with a story. When I was growing up, my family lived a short distance from the Wissahickon River in Pennsylvania. As kids, we spent a lot of time wandering along the banks of the river, jumping rocks and scrambling up and down the banks and in and out of the surrounding woods. One afternoon, my friend Melanie and I stood on one of the bridges over the river, looking down into the water. And Melanie, who loved to tell stories, told this one. The story was about a lady with 3 children. One day, as she was coming home, she saw her husband kissing another woman. She was upset. And she didn't really know what to do about it, so she put what she'd seen out of her mind and carried on as usual. Her husband, however, knew that his wife had discovered his affair, and he gradually began to resent her for what she knew, for not saying anything, and eventually for being there at all. Over time, he began to resent his children too. They were loud, always in the way, and mostly reminded him too much of her. He started to spend most of his time yelling at her and the children, and then he started beating them. He beat them every day, and sometimes all day. Terrified for her life and the lives of her children, she tried to run away with them. But each time he brought them back and he beat them more. Finally, not knowing what else to do, she took her 3 children down to the river and threw them one by one into the water. As they drowned, she felt relieved. Her husband would not be able to hurt them anymore. But after all 3 were dead, she became overcome with grief and threw herself into the water. And if you look right there, Melanie said, and she pointed right down to the water, you can see her hand scraping the bottom of the river, trying to find her drowned babies. Her spirit comes here now, Melanie said, to cry for her lost children and look for them right here under our bridge. Perhaps some of you will recognize Melanie's story as the legend legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, referred to by Jose Limon as the third most important legend of Greater Mexico. But few narrative themes are as persistent cross-culturally as maternal infanticide. Found in the Hispanic diasporic legends of Jacotl, Malinche, and La Llorona, I apologize for my horrendous pronunciation. Basque narratives of Marive, the German tradition of Die Liesfrau, the Greek Lamia and Medea, the Irish Banshee, the Northern Slavic Rusalka, African Crying Wind, Japanese Umbambe and Ioka Sinjo, and numerous other international myth, legend, epic, ballad, children's rhyme, and material culture all betray a vernacular concern with mothers who kill their children. Maternal infanticide is also a common theme in African, African American, Chinese, Japanese, and Southern American regional literature. And regionally, infanticide narratives across North America are associated with cemeteries, waterways, bridges, and schools. The tradition of setting up surrogate mourner statues in cemeteries, for example, provides exactly the ideal conditions for a weeping woman narrative, and such narratives are not unusual. In the Utah State University archives, there are numerous weeping woman accounts concerning this statue. This is the Weeping Woman of Logan Cemetery, a statue that Jeannie Thomas has discussed in her book, Naked Barbies, Warrior Joes, and Other Forms of Visible Gender. As you can see from my slide, I visited the statue in 2003 during the Fife Conference together with Jeannie, Steve Saporin and his wife Ona, Kathy Preston, John Lee, Carl Lindahl, and Peggy Yoakum, and I say thank you to Peggy Yoakum for this picture. She took it. We were legend tripping, visiting the site of a statue who cries tears of water or tears of blood when you chant, cry, lady, cry, or neglectful mother. There are numerous stories concerning the Weeping Woman statue, most of which speculate on how she came to be weeping, and most of which links her tears to the death of her children. One of those stories noted, there was a lady who lived in Logan. She was the mother of 7 children. As her husband said, she was always sad and weeping over her children. She gave them everything but life. She loved her children so much that she took their lives to save them from the evils of the world. She killed each one in a different way. When she died, her husband bought her a gravestone to match her self-image. It is the size of the woman herself. The statue is weeping, so it will remind him of the way his wife was. The story lives on. All you need to do is go to Logan Cemetery at 12 o'clock at night, and if you touch under her left eye, you can feel the tears. Weeping women, surrogate mourner, infanticide narratives are reported throughout North America, as are other regional infanticide place legends like the popular Crybaby Bridge in Ohio. One of the most interesting things about these narratives is that despite the monstrous legal and media depictions of the crime, vernacular tradition treats infanticide most frequently with understanding and compassion. Although depicted as a destructive figure within narrative tradition, La Llorona, as a Milanese story, emerges as a figure of maternal resistance, as a violated Latina mother protecting her children from poverty, from an abusive father, or even from the U.S. Immigration Service. Shirley Aurora and Mark Glaser, both of whom have done large surveys of La Llorona narratives, indicate that revenge for an unfaithful partner, unwanted children, and the mother reaching a breaking point, all of which are preconceived ideas of infanticide that turn up in folklore writings on the narrative archetype, rarely appear in their corpuses. Of Aurora's full collection, the most common causal reason for infanticide is described as mercy killing. Glaser reports that poverty and the consequent inability to provide children with food and other necessities is the most frequent motive for infanticide in his collected texts from South Texas. Whether it is Norwegian folktales of the mother who leaves her daughter out to freeze to death so she can feed the stronger children, or Japanese stories of the suicidal mother who must take her children with her to the other world so they will not be left behind dishonored, protection motifs dominate the tradition. Exploring motifs that recur in the narrative tradition cross-culturally and in criminal trials. The most common are drowning and water in general, marital infidelity, murder-suicide pacts, maternal motives of child protection, especially from an abusive father, poverty, starvation, and dishonor, a return to the crime scene looking for the children, and, most importantly, a strong belief in reuniting in the afterlife. Despite the reproduction of relations of gender, class, and race in infanticide narratives in the courts and in the media, community resort to traditional and contemporary vernacular narrative tends to be more sympathetic, highlighting internal narrative debates, vernacular debates, about structure versus agency, and placing emphasis on subjugated knowledges. Vernacular narratives like the infanticide literary tradition give the murderous mother a voice, incorporating her experience and context and making her a subject rather than a mere object of narrative. The emphasis on child protection in infanticide vernacular narrative tradition paints infanticidal action as, in Shepard Hughes' terms based on Scott, a weapon of the weak. Recently, I conducted an interview that drove home the vernacular sympathies for the infanticidal mother. I had heard from friends of a local woman in St. John's that told what she called her bad mother story. My friend Lisa, who had been there for the earlier telling, and I got a bottle of wine and went over to interview Marion. Marion's story stretched back a number of years when she was teaching college literature. Not having childcare one evening, she took her daughter, Rebecca, to class with her. That night, Marion was teaching Toni Morrison's novel, Maternal Infanticide, Beloved. Marion watched her daughter as she taught, conscious of not saying too much about the more horrific details. At one point, looking over as she was discussing the red ribbon motif in the book, she saw her little daughter, drawing a red ribbon. Alarmed, Marion began using as many euphemisms as possible, referring to, as she said, that thing that happened on page 33. Imagine how this was for the students. After the class, on the way home, Marion's daughter asked her what the book was about. Marion replied that it was about a spirit, a ghost that had come back to visit its mother. Marion's daughter asked, "How did the ghost die?" Maureen explained that the mother was a slave and killed her daughter to protect her from the bad slave master. After a few minutes, Rebecca asked, "Mommy, would you do that to me?" "Of course," Marion replied. After Marion told the story, we chatted about infanticide, about the book, and about Rebecca's reaction. Before long, I referred to killing your child to protect her as the reason for Marion labeling the narrative her bad mother story. Marion was quick to correct me. It was not killing her daughter to protect her which made Marion the bad mother. It was failing to lie to her daughter about it. In that same interview, my friend Lisa also told an infanticide story. Lisa, my closest friend and mother of two, informed me when I began this project that she would not be able to discuss it with me. It was too creepy. On this night, however, much to my astonishment, she told a story following Marion's story about her eldest child's illness many years earlier. When Stephen was just a baby, he showed signs of neurological and motor problems, which required intensive and sometimes quite painful testing. Lisa said that she would continually fantasize about eating Steve, swallowing him back into her body to keep him safe. What astonished me that night was the comfort with which both Marion and Lisa contemplated infanticide to protect their children. Reversing the symmetries highlights issues that are opened up by the vernacular discourses, but obscured by the dominant infanticide discourses. Despite the legal and media images of monstrousness, many infanticide legal cases also reflect immersing killing motifs. Kua Her, a Hmong immigrant from St. Paul, Minnesota, killed her 6 children so they would not have to suffer hunger and poverty. Diane Lumbera killed her 6 children because she believed they had a curse put on them by her mother-in-law. Andrea Yates believed her children needed to die to be spiritually saved. Famiko Kimura killed her children to save them the social stigma of being motherless. Of course, this is just one series of kaleidoscopic views of the narrative construction of infanticide, but one that I think changes the gaze. Statistics for the sentencing of mothers and fathers found guilty of killing their children reflect a seemingly gendered, class-based, and racially based mad or bad narrative dichotomy, with most mothers, 87.5% in the United States, sentenced to mental health facilities, they're the mad ones, and most fathers, 84.2% in the United States, sentenced to correctional facilities, they're the bad ones. The remaining percentage of mothers, those sentenced to correctional facilities, is disproportionately comprised of low-income immigrant women and women of color. Writing on infanticide law and the insanity defense in Duke Law Journal, Perlin argues, we remain tragically the prisoner of cultural, behavioral, and social myths and stereotypes that have the ultimate effect of blunting any efforts at crafting a coherent and thoughtful jurisprudence in this area of the law. I have talked about the kaleidoscopic reversal of asymmetries in this paper as methodological play, not because these are not serious, and I'm talking about play here, the play part of it, not because these are not serious and important ways of working, but because we cannot ever forget that our perspective-changing symmetry reversals are fragile, temporary, and only part of an effort toward correcting political asymmetry, not a lasting establishment of symmetry. It is also important to keep our kaleidoscopes moving, to see the shifting, negotiating, and constantly mutating power differentials that are culture, and avoid the risk of essentializing and reifying a single view and therefore creating a whole new set of asymmetries. More important than anything else, though, it is to recognize the politics of what we do. Primiano on gay and lesbian Catholicism, Hufford on alternative treatments for cancer, O'Connor on AIDS treatment activism, LAWLESS on women preachers, Westerman on the sanctuary movement, all highly political topics, all stories of oppression, and all dealt with in inherently political ways. It is time for belief scholars to stop living the church mouse stereotypes we hate and be clear that a great deal of our field is about correcting social asymmetries and furthering social justice. It is time for us to come clean.
He's received many awards as undergraduate and undergraduate teaching, and as we all are honored to know, she's the president of the American Folklore Society. I'm sorry, I get folklore mixed up these days. Folklore Society. Sorry. Welcome, ELAINE. Thank you.
I know some of us started at 7 o'clock this morning, so we probably need to do some calisthenics just to get through all of this. So I'll tell you how well I'm doing. I was late because I was caught on the revolving disc between Wolfgang Mader and Dan Benamos telling Richard Dawson stories. So I couldn't get out of the wedge, and then I had a Cinderella moment. Oh my God, I've got to be downstairs. And then I picked up my response, and it was actually my introduction for Ruth Behar. So it's okay, I've got this one too, but it's been one of those days, and I know you don't want to be in here a very long time. But I do want to thank Leonard and Maggie for having the wisdom to ask Diane Goldstein to give the Don Yoder lecture. As long as I've been a folklorist interested in belief, I have read, appreciated, and learned so much from Diane's scholarship. Our conversations count as some of the most fascinating and helpful to me during the past decade, perhaps even longer. Diane always writes the books and articles I wish I had written. I thank them too for asking me to respond. Being on the platform with the likes of Diane and Bill and Leonard and Maggie is like being on the rock candy mountain or something. Luckily, these responses are not intended to be carefully honed essays, so I intend only to share with you what some of my thoughts were as I read Diane's speech not too many days ago. And it was very interesting listening to it. I don't know how much she changed it, but it was really nice to hear it as well as having read it before. So actually, some of my comments at the time, I might have felt like we were not saying the same thing, and I think really in many ways we were. So these are not criticisms. We always have agreed to disagree lovingly. So I offer these as invitations for us to think about what Diane has said with, using her own imagery, more mirrors. I love the metaphor of the kaleidoscopes and the concept of mirrors. In fact, it made me remember one of my favorite books, which is now out of print, which is J. Ruby's A Crack in the Mirror, that predated and anticipated most of the ethnographic insights that later brought Marcus and Clifford so much attention. I thought Diane's notion of Yoder's skillful politics in using the apart from but alongside definition of folk religion and folk medicine was astute and interesting. I agree that Yoder knew it was important to talk about folk religion and belief as at least on the same level as institutional religion or belief. Yet Diane points out that the institutional sector holds more power in the power differential than does the folk sector. I found myself really thinking about this proposition, and I think I disagree with it. The reason I disagree is that when I think about how ordinary people make meaning through belief and non-canonical religious practice, their belief and practice runs deeper in their veins than does their allegiance to whatever the Pope, the bishop, or the church decrees. They acknowledge that power. They may even bow to it and kiss the Pope's ring, but what they do in their own homes, in the privacy of their own bedrooms, in their communities, says more to me than all the talk about the power of the institution. While it is true that the institutional church had the power to behead people and change the course of history, personal, private, community belief still has the power to inspire the creation of home altars, belief trees, tiny messages poked into the holes of a sacred wall, and shape how we raise our children, how we vote, to whom we pray, and how we believe in the efficacy of that prayer, from one lonely, broken soul directly to the God of our choice. So I would like for us to at least imagine how the asymmetry, the power differential, is actually on the side of the power of the folk, suggesting a different phrase I've come up with alongside, but runneth deeper. Runneth deeper. I think even Diane's example of the power of the Catholic Church on its laity is an excellent example. The Church's views are known and accounted for, but what directs everyday life may diverge from the rules in either small, subversive ways or larger, blatant ways. I think in this I'm probably going to hell with Leonard, but I'm delighted to be in such good company, and would like to point out that in religious studies today, there is much concern about what's being called lived religion, the study of lived religion, which to me has not at all recognized how much they're actually replicating what folklorists have been doing for nearly a century, holding as its premise that the religion people live may bear little resemblance at times to the rules of the church. Secondly, Diane points out that folklorists have disagreed over the years about whether or not folklore studies should be concerned with the political. My very first response to her list of quotes from folklorists, as you saw up there, is that all the quotes are from men and they're all white men. I am notorious for checking lists for this kind of gender inequality, and this one, like so many others, made me suspicious just by its inclusion of white males and the exclusion of women and minorities or persons of color and members of ethnic groups. First of all, it made me think, I believe all folklore is political by its nature. This is not the forum for me to argue this in depth, I know that, but I do really think that's true. I also tell my students that I believe all folklore is about belief. Again, I luckily don't have time to argue that. However, I do want to point out that if we cast our net a bit wider, we can find all sorts of women scholars and scholars who come from communities other than the white male-dominant culture, whose work has always been political because their lives and their ethnographic work are always political. And they are transparent about their work being political. After reading Diane's speech, I ran and got Ruth Behar and Deborah Gordon's voluminous response to Clifford and Marcus's Writing Culture, which is of course entitled Women Writing Culture, because I knew from using this book in my courses that there was proof aplenty in that text that scholars such as Elsie Clues Parsons, Ruth Benedict, Ella Deloria, Zora Neale Hurston, Ruth Landis, Barbara Meyerhoff, Esther Newton, all wrote from a position from the margins, and from that position, politics is always at the heart of their work. And of course, I could spend the rest of this evening listing other scholars, Gerald Davis, Anand Prahlad, Pat Turner, and scores of other folklorists whose work demands we recognize that politics is always significant and that we must take those positions into account in our folklore work. Last year, I used a quote from Stanley Fish, who also said fairly recently that humanists in general should leave politics to the politicians. I said then, and I'll repeat it now, I think both he and Richard Dorson are dead wrong. And on that note, I think a great many folklorists currently publishing in folklore do acknowledge the politics in their work. And I totally agree with Diane that to not acknowledge the inherent politics of our work wrongly suggests that we are chroniclers of culture and not active participants in its construction. While we might want to believe we should not take on the responsibility of changing the course of anything, much less history or folklore, through our work, I also think we have to be accountable. Our work reveals some of the deepest and often darkest aspects of human nature, and how the othering of one group by another can lead to holocausts and ethnic cleansing and violence against women. To not take a stand, at least in terms of human rights and social justice, makes us complicit in the disharmony that leads to atrocities and wars. If we have the tools to illuminate how prejudice and misogyny operate both for community solidarity and ethnic cleansing, then we are morally obligated, in my opinion, to at least try to demonstrate how those beliefs and attitudes work in the world and can lead to great harm. On the other hand, I'm fascinated with Diane's work that reveals the folk narratives of female infanticide, that they're more generous than those of the popular media. And I love Hufford's notion of methodological populism. Of course, I love everything Hufford does. And interestingly, when I first read Diane's quote by Hufford about this, I thought it said, when comparing official and unofficial views, we always begin with a serious consideration that the unofficial position is always correct. I had to go back and read it again. That's not what he said. But I wondered why I read it that way. He said the unofficial position may be correct. Actually, in my own paper tomorrow on women healers, I am challenging exactly this stance, or at least I'm asking us to go back to Hufford's directive that patient truth claims count as truth and as real. Furthermore, I applaud Diane's own decision to choose topics for study that are constituted by the loudest of dominant discourses. That's where folklore should be, right in the middle of the fray, challenging, questioning, and offering new reflections on the mirrors of human action and belief. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That's wonderful. I'm restraining myself from saying anything. I want to break in something, but I also want to introduce Bill Westerman, who is our other respondent for this paper. Bill is in the writing program at Princeton University and is one of our most distinguished scholars on politics and belief, and we're welcoming Bill for his response.
Thank you very much. I'm really very honored to have been invited to speak as a discussant here. And I want to congratulate Diane on a really brilliant paper and thank Maggie and Leonard for the invitation extended here tonight. Diane's brilliant and important talk here has a serendipitous side note, which is that the first convention of the Brewster Society, an organization of kaleidoscope aficionados and collectors, took place here in Louisville in 1989. However, I'd like to toy slightly with this metaphor. For me, the appropriate metaphor is not only kaleidoscopes, but teleidoscopes with a T. You're going to learn a new word tonight. A teleidoscope functions similarly to a kaleidoscope, except that there are no stones or pretty objects inside, but a lens at the far end through which to view the actual world. If a kaleidoscope is an appropriate metaphor for folklore, looking at beautiful stones, stories, objects, and texts in ways that make them complex and beautiful and obfuscates their asymmetries, then the kaleidoscope is an apt description of folk life, looking at reality through a lens of many perspectives that make the quotidian a field of extraordinary complexity and indescribable beauty. We folklorists play at both. In a world in which religion, politics, nationality, citizenship, and culture are often reduced to a series of checkboxes, often for the purpose of drawing up sides, we recognize the complex relations of spiritual, medical, and political intersections. What speaks to us is not just the beauty, but the use, and not just the use, but the beauty. Not just the permanent, but the ephemeral, not just the written, but also the oral, the unspoken as well as the verbal, the traditional and the innovative, the fun alongside the grave. I think Diane's eloquent deconstruction of alongside could not be more on target. In any event, Diane's metaphor of play is an apt one. One can indeed imagine that if scientists' tools include microscopes and telescopes, and doctors use stethoscopes, endoscopes, bronchoscopes, and sigmoidoscopes, it is only fitting for folklorists to use kaleidoscopes and telidoscopes. Don Yoder is, after all, the man who famously said that we really need books on the history of the pie and the house dress. We are all epistemological tricksters. The other point I would like to make concerns why we haven't come clean. I'm the last person to be an apologist for this, but we also have to understand this phenomenon in order to critique it. In the disciplinary pantheon, we are the most marginal discipline in terms of the asymmetry of power within recognized learned fields. This has been brutally reminded to us by the demolition of two of our most successful departments within the last 5 years. And while bell hooks and others have written eloquently on the prophetic power of speaking from the margins, we know the risks that we face relative to other fields, just as people from subaltern groups recognize the power structures they are up against. Few of us feel secure and permanent enough in our jobs, especially during the last 50 years of culture wars in the United States, to be able to take on not only the epistemological establishment, but also the tradition of post-Enlightenment scientific rationalism. Red baiting and blacklisting silenced our most significant political voices in one generation, including Botkin, Lomax, Pete Seeger, and Paul Robeson, 50 years ago. More recently, cuts to arts budgets, removing art and music education from schools, challenging bilingual education, and the elimination of departments and courses of study have made us cautious political players. The prophetic voices for social justice, be they Quakers, radical Roman Catholics, or outspoken African American preachers, were able to overcome their fear through faith. But professional intellectuals in underfunded academic departments, state agencies, and NGOs have no such rock of faith. We speak out at our own risk to our own livelihood, unless we have tenure, and risks to those we study and care about and collaborate with who stand more directly in the line of fire than we do. We are implicated in the power structure by virtue of our methodological and epistemological radicalism. The risks to us are not nearly so great as they are to the subaltern, possibly persecuted and oppressed folks we work with, but we also acknowledge the risks of our own marginalism, even if ultimately some of us risk little more than our own privilege. If we do our jobs well, we are shape changers, able to empathize to such an extent that we take on the worldviews of the communities we work with. And we can be supreme collaborators, walking alongside and not apart from the people who struggle for justice, although this is an asymmetrical relationship on our part as well. This is, as Diane has suggested, methodological play, deadly serious in intent and outcome. But ethnology is not antithetical to being partisan, and the intellectual and political paths we tread demand the nimblest of footwork. Thank you.
might add for a moment that I'm a professor at Cabrini College outside of Philadelphia, where the dean is Johnny McCormick as a PhD in folklore, where I, as the chair of the Religious Studies Department, have a PhD in folklore, and where we recently hired Nancy Waterson in the History Department, who has a PhD in folklore. We now have more folklorists at Cabrini than at the University of Pennsylvania. And obviously the influence that we have had over the curriculum and over the college has been, it is, I would say, profound, and it continues to grow in its profundity as the college changes into a social justice general curriculum. So that we are helping in the development of that, along with a lot of other very interested young faculty. So we're trying our best. Now, are there any questions? Or comments, kids? Or I'll start calling on you.
We should hear from Meg.
Well, Margaret has her hand. Margaret.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry, with Sabina.
Thank you. Well, all right, since you're going to start calling on people, I'll sacrifice myself first. I want to go back to that set of quotes that you started with, Diane, from Bodkin and
From the white boys.
from
yeah.
the white men, only some of whom are dead. And tell you my reaction as I was reading them. Of course, you know that I went to Indiana right when Dorson died. I mean, I started when Dorson died, and I don't think that those two things were related. And Dorson's paradigm still reigns supreme, I think, in the education of folklorists at that time. In other words, that we were very much instructed that we were not to become involved, to take part of the people that we work with, or to advocate for them. We're talking about 25, 30 years ago. And Dorson had it in for Bodkin. He absolutely hated Bodkin, and we were all sort of enculturated to hate Bodkin. And then some years later, when I was reading Bodkin for something else, I thought, well, wait a minute, this guy rocks. Why did Dorson hate him so much? So that was kind of my revelation. But upon reflection, I think that in a sense, we can see validity in both Bodkin's point of view and Dorson's point of view. In this sense.
Convince me.
Okay. On the one hand, it is very clear that folkloristics is a political field in the sense that any action in the world is political action. We are political animals, and we move in a world that is imbued with power relationships, and we cannot subtract ourselves from those power relationships. In addition, as you very clearly illustrated, and as Elaine's and Bill's comments pointed out, folklore, by its very nature, takes a worm's eye view of things, and therefore takes the part of those who have been on the wrong end, on the receiving end of power in many cases. We have a tremendous mission to accomplish in the world. We have a great mission in showing people how to empathize with those on the receiving end of power, and how to understand their way of looking at things, their culture, what it's like to be in that particular position. So yes, we have a mission, we have a responsibility, and folklore is about raising consciousness around issues of social justice. On the other hand, I also understand why Dorson advised caution around getting involved with power issues. And here I'm reminded of my fieldwork in Sardinia. I wasn't really trying to get involved in terms of changing relationships of power. But without even realizing it, my being there and the book that I ended up writing created some waves, made waves in a community that it was already politically polarized. And rather than reflecting badly on me, rather than having negative consequences for me, what I thought would be a book that would that would celebrate the culture of this place and undo some of the political damage that my forebears had done, basically because I came from a position of privilege, ended up actually backfiring, and it was taken out on the very people that I had worked with who could least afford to protect themselves. And I wasn't even trying, consciously to do something to, change political relationships in this town or anything like that. All I was doing was what folklorists do best, which is to write, to educate, to try to get people to empathize with others. So the caution there is that when we release something of ours out into the world, whether it's a book or a piece of action for social justice, we often don't know what the repercussions of that action are going to be. We lose control of it once it leaves our hands. And the repercussions can often be very different from what we hope that they would be. So I guess my message is one both of hope on the one hand and also caution on the other in saying how both these points of view have a kernel of validity to them.
I sort of agree with you, and I sort of don't agree with you.
That's okay.
Part of it's because, I think that this is where the collaborative ethnography really comes in, that really helps in knowing kind of how what you're doing is going to be received, or hopefully so, and reciprocal ethnography. The second part of it, and I'm going to say this, whether I'm 95% or maybe 90% with what I'm saying here, so there's still that 10%, which is that if we don't say things because we're afraid of how they're going to be received, we're never going to say anything.
Oh, no, I agree with you. We need to say what we need to say, regardless of how it's going to be received, if we are going to take the consequences. It's, I still struggle with what happened there, even though it's been many years and things have calmed down, and the consequences now, looking back on it, are not so devastating. But at the time, I think it really was devastating to people that I had worked with who could not protect themselves against the consequences of that. And I still struggle with that. So I'm coming to this from a very personal point of view.
Yeah, and I think, the hope is that our ethnography will be good enough that we will know how, or we will have some sense of how what we put out there will be responded to. But I know that that's kind of a pipe dream. Erica.
I think it's also worth remembering that it can cut the other way too. Some of you know that the research I did on the recordings of American Indian material on cylinder phonograph in the early part of the century were done highly politically motivated with the intention of accelerating the process of assimilation that would eliminate American Indian groups as autonomous cultural groups over a period of time. And to some degree, this was actually cooperated with implicitly by the people who were working with them. That was also their understanding. So it was, at best, a salvage operation. It turned out they were wrong. And the unintended consequence was that a tremendous body of very important ceremonial material ended up being preserved in a form that made it accessible and translatable into a different set of political uses a century after it had been recorded. We can't know, in fact, the consequences of what we do, and some of the most troubling things that we see undertaken. God works in mysterious ways, right? Sometimes those things can be translated in very unexpected and unpredictable ways. We can do obviously we need to do what we can to protect and to direct our efforts, but we can't know or completely control them.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Bill?
Well, I think another reason for being explicit about our political agendas is that if we, as Sabina says, if we disclaim political intentions, then we may, without realizing it, marginalize ourselves as a profession, either in the public sector or particularly in the academic sector, because most of the disciplines that we are, that rival us for the attention of deans, students, and the like, are highly politicized. Now, they may well be superficially politicized. They may not know enough about the cultures and their traditions to make good political decisions, but at least they are aware about it, aware of it, they can express it, and therefore they can present themselves as being people who are actually out to make a difference. That's what I find personally offensive about the quotes from Dorson, saying that, well, folklore should not be a practical profession. Well, I think it should be. If it is not, then it isn't really a profession. It's simply an interest area. It's a hobby. And so I think one of the things that we need to, whatever our politics are, whether they are conservative or liberal, radical or reactionary, we should be aware that not only are we political animals, but we are important to other people, that we have influence on other people precisely because of our politics. And I think that coming clean, as you put it, really is an essential element to justifying ourselves as a discipline, and not just as a bunch of people that have peculiar interests.
I just wanted to challenge what you said, Elaine, about the church and people doing what they want to do anyway. They do it, we do it, but we are psychologically damaged by it. And if you take the women that Diane talked about, who kill their children because they don't want them to go to hell, you know, there is this level of suppression that is so ugly to them.
Thank you. Yeah. Wow. I was just going to respond to your other perspective, which was I was agreeing with something as what I wanted to say earlier. So it's interesting that you had such a divergent feeling about oppression and power differential regarding the church in some ways, because we always say this. I heard from a priest, but it's a pretty common perception. We let them do what they want in Rome, we stay Catholic. It's a disregard for the institutional power of the church. And there's so much anti-clerical folklore as well. And on the other hand, I was thinking about the politics of the election and the fact that there is this power that's being exercised. Politically. And the other comment I just wanted to make about what Diane was talking about with children, what is between infants and parents, that's one of the most asymmetrical power relationships. And I really had a hard time listening, and then I started to think about it. And as folklorists, we collected children's folklore a lot because of that asymmetrical reality of power relationships. In the past, you can't do it now with IRBs, but you still I was thinking about that and about both the potential and the difficulty.
I also think that part of the reason probably that I've taken such a strong stance in terms of the Catholic Church is because I've seen where I live, it's so conservative, the church is so conservative, and the response to the church is so conservative, and you still see people who will be at a party, but then the priest comes in, and they'll go and they're singing, they'll slide under the table. They'll go sit under the table to sing because they won't be seen by the priest singing secular songs. And he comes into the party, they're scared to death.
But also fundamentalist religions. I had a friend who worked in that and you know, children who had been hung by their thumbs in the closet by others of fundamentalist groups like Jehovah's Witnesses. mean, not that I have anything against any religions, but they're fundamentalist.
Yeah, I actually thought that Elaine would go after me for not taking up Protestantism a little bit more. Missed your chance.
It's okay. I'll get you next.
Perhaps it's just worth remembering that understanding the tradition and the reason behind it is not the same as affirming. We are not necessarily advocating for anything study. Certainly the case with religious traditions that I studied dealing with the definition of psychological problems as being a result of satanic ritual abuse. I think that was, in a different way, psychologically damaging to the patients and was a result of medical abuse, as confirmed as such by a lot of civil courts. But understanding why that tradition arose among psychologists, clinical psychologists, and psychoanalysts really is essential. Otherwise, we're just simply reacting against something that we feel is wrong.
Happy better. Yeah. Sorry.
You were asking or talking about how to speak.
You have to stand up.
Yeah, they stand.
No, you, but you have to stand. We can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me. I wonder, it sounds as though each of you are coming out of, or are based in your own religious traditions, even if you're working with other religious traditions, or you have some background of your own. Maybe not, maybe I'm way off here, but I'm wondering, when you approach working with folklore, if at all, whatever traditions you come out of, one comes out of one's, might come out of oneself, is going to affect on some level the kind of work you end up doing, or the way you see folklore. Whether you come out of sort of high Catholic church or...
It's not for me. I'll celebrate anything you send my way. So.
I just want to
believe or celebrate anything you send my way. So for me, it's not actually, it's not the way it's constructed, but it might be for Leonard and that.
I thought that perhaps Diane, that the one aspect of local religion scholarship that Diane would have identified as being not particularly contestational was Mormon scholarship. And I've recently been asked to review Bert Wilson's Spendthrift by Joe Rudy, and I'm going to get into big trouble in Salt Lake City because I'm finding that the problem with that scholarship is that, in fact, as fascinating as it is in many ways, that it does not seemingly in any way contest the power relationships between the Mormon Church and the believers, and that may be a stage within Mormonism in America right now, and that in America, with American Catholicism is at such a stage that one can write such critical scholarship and still, essentially find a place in the Catholic Academy. I don't think that we're there yet with the Mormon Academy.
I think too about this, in some ways it's related to the question of do you study what you study because of your own belief position? That's essentially what you're asking. And I remember there's been many debates that have gone on about this issue a few years ago, well, 1995, I guess, the special issue came out where it was based on a panel.
I organized it, Don chaired it.
That it ended up being a special 1995 special issue of Western Folklore, and it was on reflexivity and folklore. And part of what happened there was that, and it happened several times over the years, was the idea would come up, it was actually from Jeff Titan, that he had said to Bert Wilson, and I was thinking this while you were talking, that Bert would never be a good scholar because he was a Mormon, and he would never be a good Mormon because he was a scholar. And Margaret didn't see anybody say that to her, but anyway, you know, when that was happening, I remember this notion that you can't study something because you are a part of that tradition is really problematic. And I remember David Hufford giving one of his typically fabulous David Hufford lines, which was, he said, "That's like saying that if you want to study food waste, you have to be anorexic." You know, it really is the case that belief studies, and maybe political studies, are the only parts of folklore where we really expect that from people. And there's something,
That's right. Yeah.
you know, there's something off base about
That's right.
that.
Yeah. And also the perspective that David Hubbard has constantly put out that somehow a disbeliever in a particular tradition could have a more of an objective framework when that disbelief could also equally be affecting their work.
Yeah.
I think the main thing, though, is you have to be honest about where you do stand in our ethnography. And that's, you know, but if you go into a direction, in other words, certainly looking at belief studies, you know, like the rational beliefs, deserts and all that, I mean, it's everywhere in our history. So we can go either direction.
The woman in the red sweater there is what I'm trying to ask you.
Well, it's going back to the fancy stuff.
Yay, finally. It's a light topic.
Could you tell me who you are?
Aaron Roth, and I haven't been to AFS for 5 years because I've been having babies. And
Welcome back.
and I have had moments where I felt like I wanted to kill them, and I realize now, I mean, it was after like 8 months of this craziness in my head, I was at postpartum depression. I was just wondering, or I was thinking about what you're talking about. I mean, I had this memory of the woman Susan. I think she ran her kids over into a pond, and I just thought that was the most horrible thing that I could possibly imagine. But then being a mother, of a new mother, and having this depression, I understood it. I had an amazing amount of compassion for her. And I was just thinking about Puffer's work with the night in care and how there is a physiological, chemical thing that's actually.
For that reason, I'm focusing in my project mostly on filicide, which is the murder of older children, because it helps with that and that issue. And it's also because infanticide is dealt with in courts in very different ways in different countries. So in Canada, it would never be murder if it was within postpartum depression period of time. That's on the books. It's not in the United States. And Lynn had her hand up back there.
Do we have time?
Of course.
Okay. I have a question that I don't mean rhetorically, however much it might sound rhetorical. And Leonard may have just answered it actually, but Diane, you're saying that all belief scholarship is political, and Elaine, you hinted perhaps that all folklore is political, and I can see kind of on a basic level of dealing with non-institutional culture, you always have the institution as kind of that asymmetrical power dynamic with it. And Leonard, I was going to ask, is there what would be non-political then? I mean, what could we see these quotes that you gave from Richard Dorson and Eliot talking about non-political addressing of folklore? I was going to ask what is available to that. And Leonard, you mentioned the Mormon scholarship where there's simply no questioning of that legitimacy. So I guess the question then is, if all folklore is political, it sounds like there are apolitical approaches that one can take. And so my question now is there any validity to an apolitical approach to material that is inherently political? Is there any reason for someone who's uncomfortable or hesitant or whatever, should they leave the field? I mean, is there any value in study that does not take on these challenges at all? Or is there a place for that and it's simply incomplete without the political side?
I back to Wisnit's quote, you know, where you are taking political action no matter what you think you're doing otherwise.
So you're
I would
pulling yourself.
agree with ELAINE that all folklore is political. But I also, I think that's exactly Elliot Oring's point. I think Elliot Oring thinks that there is some way of doing folklore that is not political. But I don't think he explained what that was.
And I think a wonderful exercise that I don't want to do, but somebody should do, is to even read Dorson or Elliot Oring or anybody who said we should be political, because their work is political. I mean, I'm thinking about his work with folk humor. I mean, it's almost like those quotes are disembodied from the people we know and the work that they do. And, you know, Dorson was political, very political. I mean, you know, even at the same time he was saying we shouldn't be political, and, you know, training us not to be and whatever. And Elliot, it's just really odd to see these quotes and then know the work that they've done. It's very odd, isn't it? Because we know better. Or I don't believe there could be.
But often political gets defined as challenging.
You're going to say that louder. What?
I said often political gets defined as challenging the hegemony, so that those who don't overtly challenge it can say their work is not political and dissuade a political perspective.
Well,
but
that's not actually what Elliot was arguing, was that in that piece it was an anti-advocacy perspective.
Right.
And what he was arguing for was that folklore should not be advocates, was very much the Dorson position.
But see, I would argue that much of Dorson's work, if you look at it, you could say that in the choices that Dorson made, for example, his decision to look at certain genres of African American folklore and present in this very particular way this portrait of African American expressivity, that there was deep politic in that, but it was not a politic, it was a challenging politic.
He didn't come clean.
Right, so Dorson could stay there and say, my work is entirely neutral. We can look at that work now and say it was far from neutral. It was in fact affirmed.
I love the quote from Amy Schumann about it's so constructed we can't see it. Right, exactly.
Yes. Bill, I'm sorry, there was someone behind you.
Yeah, I think it comes down to how you define politics. And one thing I would suggest is that to some extent, those arguments are a rhetorical ploy in order to say, hey, we are not making judgments here, we are just explaining how the world is. Now, I agree with you that you can't do that and all of that, but unfortunately there's a place for that in the academy, and it's occasionally necessary to argue that. So I'm not sure that, roasting Dorson and Oring is completely necessary.
My point, though, when I brought up Dorson and Oring and all of them, was to say that there continues to be a debate about how political folklore should be. So it is not a surprise that in relief studies people have not felt comfortable to talk about politics in the study of folklore.
Yep.
And I was just going to make the obvious point that there is purely classification, collecting, organizing, annotating, and the like that can be done simply valuing the material that we collect for its intrinsic interest and value that can be done by lots of lots.
But Glenn would say just by what you select to put in that category, in that you're making decisions.
That's a political decision. Exactly.
I'm Glenn Henson now.
But it's not a matter of standing up and saying, yeah, hooray for African American narrative tradition. We need to make a place for this in the academy. It's a very small scale way of doing that, of valuing some kind of indigenous belief or art. I mean, Wayland Hand's massive collections of superstitions politicians may well have been wrong-headed in many ways, but they made an enormous amount of indigenous folk knowledge accessible and available. So they were political in the long run, even though the works themselves are not explicitly political. And I think that answers the point that you made.
Maybe we need to distinguish between advocacy and politics. Because I'm thinking, for example, of the work of my colleague Matthias Gardel, who has worked with hate groups and white supremacists in the American South. Obviously, his work is very political. On the other hand, he does the very opposite from advocate in favor of these ideologies. He exposes them for what they are. So,
this is part of Eliot's argument as well, and I'm not sure I buy it, actually. I know that there are people who do that. I believe as folklorists that, now, I've had discussions with a number of people in this room about this over time, but when Eliot's article came out, the way I responded to it is that as a folklorist, when you study someone, it's your some community, it is your responsibility to at least believe that you should understand their worldview and that their worldview is worth understanding. And that to me is an advocacy position. It might not be that you advocate everything else about their positions, but it means that you are willing to understand why they do what they do. And I have to say, when Eliot came up with this, he said, we're not advocates, we wouldn't be studying neo-Nazis and be advocating for them. And it was exactly the argument you're making, Sabina. And my feeling was, I can't study neo-Nazis, I can't advocate for them, so I don't. But I can study people who don't disclose their HIV status, so I do, and I can advocate for them. And I can advocate for women that kill their children. Now, presumably the next question is why, and I don't know that answer. So. But I think that the willingness to enter into understanding, to trying to understand someone's worldview, at least says it is worth understanding, and that's an advocacy position.
I think I feel the same way about the abusers. When I had an opportunity to flip the coin and was offered the opportunity to study a group of abusers, and I finally declined. I can't do that.
I mean, these are political choices.
Exactly.
And, I'm not interested in studying hate groups, so I'm not taking an advocacy position.
No, I
but I can tell you that this colleague was able to illuminate why these groups are drawn to this ideology. But at the same time, reading his book is chilling. Because, you understand this, but you also are horrified in your understanding, and in the fact that you begin to kind of understand why they would do it. It's disturbing.
It seems that one of the principal arguments for the whole notion of collaborative ethnography is one that says not only that we attempt to understand as fully as possible, but we also agree to disagree. So we agree to disagree. So that as we move into a collaborative relationship, it doesn't mean that we have to advocate for those whose positions we don't agree with, but we will present them with honor in a way that they will recognize themselves, and they won't come out of it feeling as if we duped them or we did an editorial sleight of hand, or we did that in order that we might have a final editorial say, is ultimately critical. But the difficulty in that sort of relationship is always how do you establish that agreement to disagree? How do you reach that place where your understanding with your consultants in the field is that you do not necessarily have to agree with them, and that you can present them with a sense of honor, but at the same time you can present your perspective alongside theirs.
And if you can't do that, then don't do it.
I might add, I've been I've been asked within the last week to do 2 5-minute spots about Father Divine on WHYY, which is the public broadcasting station in Philadelphia. And I've had a fascinating sort of conversation with the producers there about how they're going to present them in the same way, engaging them with some kind of honor, and also obviously engaging the Beast Vision members with the same kind of honor about how their religion is going to be broadcast on television. Yes.
I guess my only point was that I have these advocate or social justice kind of impulses, but I find it troubling because I feel like I'm limited. I don't really even know how to help. You know, I mean, now you can write a book, but is it going to trickle down to people that, I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is it's hard for me to set up those expectations. I certainly have never communicated it to the people I've worked with, because there was this one very recently. I was in the field and a woman was telling me about some struggle they're having with the housing federal regulation. And she said, what do you with? What paper are you with? And I said, I'm with the university. Why am I talking to you? You can't do anything. And that was, I was like, she's right. At least not a kind of an immediate sort of thing.
But
I mean, I didn't get into this field,
there are lots of ways that folklorists can involve themselves in other kinds of levels of advocacy and policy without or over and above just writing their books. I shouldn't say just, but over and above writing their books.
Yes.
I thought that a term that Diane used actually in an earlier book really did something for me, and that's the hermeneutics of generosity. And that seems to me that middle place where we probably shouldn't get into minorities. We're trying to work through those, and I think Sabine will work through that too. That there is a contingent, and so that it's not as empathetic that the decision and slide up and down the activity road.
I should say, while people are writing that down, while I would like to claim ownership of that, it actually originally came from my hero, Paul Farmer, who's an anthropologist and a physician who's been working on AIDS in Haiti and also worked with drug-resistant tuberculosis in Peru, and who has been able to make big inroads. And because he has both the anthropology degree and the PhD and the MD, he's able to constantly be with who saying, you're not doing this right, you need to do this a different way.
And if you would like a ball farmer come to your college, it's about $20,000 a night because we try to get him at Cabrini. Anyone else?
So much for heroism.